Hey everyone, I just wanted to chime in real quick, do an intro before the podcast that you're about to listen to. This is from one of the subscribers of my channel, Collecting and Hobbies, but he's also got a YouTube channel now that he started for this podcast called First Jedi, and First Jedi Podcast. I think that's right, First Jedi Podcast. I'll put a link below. But anyways, this is his first full episode, and I'll put the link to it. It's on Buzzsprout, if you're familiar with that site. But I'm not in this particular episode, but I am coming up on, I think it's his third one maybe. So anyways, without further ado, here's the podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Star Wars, the First Jedi podcast. This is going to be a podcast about literally anything and everything Star Wars related, mainly action figures, films, opinions on the film, anything that has to do with Star Wars or Star Wars collecting. And this particular podcast, what's going to make it unique and different will be certain points of view that you may or may not have heard before. And the reason that would be is because I'm actually in the retail industry. So, as a retailer that actually sells the figures, merchandise, I have early access to the majority, pretty much everything out there. I know a lot of stuff early, not sometimes like years early, but it could be anywhere from a couple days to about a year and a half. Really, it just depends on what it is. And with that kind of perspective, and I also have business. So the business perspective would be maybe quite different from what you guys would expect. There's a lot of people who go onto fan websites and complain about distribution, the choices that are made for the actual products themselves, not just like the actual choices of like what characters are made, or what vehicles, but also the way that they execute those. So as a retailer, I've also been involved with doing reviews and submitting numerous different types of like feedback and survey type things. Sometimes people, different companies, not just Star Wars companies, will send me goods to do a review, to point out all the good things, to point out all the bad things. And I try to do my best to try to help them get better at what they do. So this is something that I've been thinking about doing for a while, and a lot of people have been telling me that it would be very interesting and that I should do it. This podcast, I've been trying to get off the ground for a little while. I wanted to find some interesting guests, some maybe even possibly a co-host, and I think from now on, well, I have that I think I found a perfect co-host, possibly. So, for now, for the first episode, I'm going to introduce him as a guest. I have located several different guests already, and so there will be other guests on the show. We're going to probably do some action figure reviews as well. We'll talk about upcoming products, upcoming release dates, talk about possibly, since I own a retail business, I might actually, what I've been trying to do is for the fans, a lot of people, they want pre-orders for figures early and very much in advance, so they can get everything that they want without any problem, so they can complete their collections. Now, some of these items have street dates, and so I'm probably going to avoid that for now, as far as like this upcoming Last Jedi products. They have release dates, at least the first couple of waves, for September 1st. So by the time this podcast comes out, it would be probably mid-August, close to September anyway. I wanted to get at least one episode out before Force Friday, so we can talk about maybe what's coming out on Force Friday and what we plan to do for Force Friday, and then another episode directly after Force Friday, so we can compare what we thought was going to happen, what actually did happen, and so on and so on. So, as your host, you can call me the First Jedi. The First Jedi podcast, hosted by the First Jedi and a guest host, which I will name in a little while when I'll bring him on as a guest. And we already have a couple of upcoming guests that are in the works. Some of them are actual actors or actresses that were in some deleted scenes in the original Star Wars 1977 film. I've got several people in the works right now. So it could be anywhere from reviewers to fan site owners to actual actors and actresses in the movies. Now, the primary reason I'm doing this is for the fans. I want them to know the truth about what's going on, not get caught up in too many rumors, and because some people, they just post stuff just to post stuff, and they don't really know what they're talking about. And my guest today is one of those people that is what we would call in the know, and you would know probably the majority of what is going to happen and what's not going to happen, and as far as future releases and what's really coming out and what's really not, what's discontinued, just different little things like that. And as far as the websites go, he can give his perspective from that point of view. And of course, I can kind of confirm and deny up to a certain point of a certain amount of things. Give you maybe some tips and hints of what could be coming out, maybe so you guys can kind of figure it out for yourself. And of course, we'll also review some of those action figures and different items and let you know just how good or not so good that they really are. All right, so one of the first things I wanted to talk about was maybe retail perspective. As far as the actual products that are released for retail, a lot of people think a lot of the Force Awakens stuff, sometimes you can still find that, and people are really freaking out like, oh, we'll never get this or we'll never get that, because Force Awakens stuff is still around. Now, The Force Awakens is a primary film from the actual prequel trilogy, which means that it has more importance than, say, Rogue One, which is a side film. And from that, we can figure out that what sells well, they should reorder. So a lot of places such as Target and other places that have been getting Force Awakens stuff restocked lately, it's not because it didn't sell in the first place, it's because it did sell and they sold out of it. So they still have orders coming in. A lot of this stuff is available for a good year or more, and they make it available. Hasbro tries to make every assortment available for about a year or more, a year to 18 months, depending on how it sells. So if you have like a certain amount of Wave 1 figures and they keep selling, well, why would you not buy more? Because they're selling okay. So things like that, we can I can give you tips on and stuff like that, because it's not that they're peg warming. Maybe in some places they might be, but yeah, it's really not as bad as you think it is. However, there is a lot of stuff out there that does seem to kind of sit around, but eventually it will probably sell through. A lot of places are putting stuff on clearance right now, not necessarily because it hasn't sold well, is because they're trying to make room for the new stuff, especially in the beginning. The beginning is where they make a lot of their profits. Probably their biggest profits is because it's all brand new. So everybody's going to buy it straight out the gate. Now, when it becomes hard to find, of course, they keep ordering more. Just because they keep ordering more doesn't necessarily mean it's not selling. It means that it is selling and that they need more so they can, make more money. But we'll get into all this kind of stuff first. We're going to do some introductions. I'm going to go ahead and do an introduction for myself, and then I'm going to bring on my guest, and he can introduce himself to all of you guys. So from the beginning, I've been a lifelong Star Wars fan. I was around for the original trilogy. I collected the original trilogy items, and I prefer the original trilogy, but I also am a fan of Clone Wars. I like that series, even though at the beginning, of course, a lot of people had a problem with Anakin having a Padawan, but we pretty much all of us have learned to really love Ahsoka Tano. She's probably one of the most beloved characters in the Star Wars universe altogether. So I even heard somebody do a poll saying the top 2 characters in the Star Wars universe, the only person that Ahsoka was behind was Darth Vader. So yeah, we will probably, both me and the person that I'm going to be bringing on as a guest and future co-host, I believe that both of us are from the original trilogy era. We prefer the original trilogy over the new stuff that George Lucas has nothing really to do with. George Lucas appointed Kathleen Kennedy as his president because he wanted to make sure that the basic feel of the Star Wars universe would always be there. I don't think they've really gone too far outside of what the Star Wars universe should be. When I first saw The Force Awakens, I saw it with a friend, and we were thinking of it more of a sequel than kind of a reboot. And as a sequel, a lot of people didn't think that it really held up. And there's too many new characters. It's too far away from Return of the Jedi, 35 years or whatever later. And so a lot of people didn't really have a whole lot of love for the movie when it first came out, and including me, because the person next to me was complaining all the way through the movie, and I was really just trying to pay attention to the movie. And once I saw it on DVD and watched it a few times, I actually thought of it in a different light. I'm not saying that I like it better than the original trilogy, because I simply don't. But it is a new generation of Star Wars, and depending we really maybe not be able to make any kind of judgment on the actual trilogy yet, because there's only one film in the new trilogy. However, I do prefer the original cast, the original characters. I prefer all of that way more than Rogue One or The Force Awakens. You got to remember, George Lucas is the creator of Star Wars. He's the one who created Star Wars. What we fell in love with, the reason Star Wars is popular today in the first place, is because of George Lucas and his vision. His vision is what we fell in love with, not the other stuff. So if they can continue to do stuff that's still within his vision, then it will be successful. If they alienate the character, if it gets too out of focus, then obviously people are not going to like it and they're not going to stick around. But as of right now, the franchise is probably at its peak, as far as making money. And so let's get back to where we started off. So I collected the Star Wars figures. I actually had basically the entire collection when I was a child. So growing up with Star Wars, I think the very first time I was dressed up for Halloween, I was like C-3PO. And then the next year I was Darth Vader. The year after that I was Luke Skywalker. And so I grew up Star Wars. Star Wars was my primary collection. It was my primary focus when, toys and especially movies. I grew up where I wasn't allowed to watch a whole lot of stuff with violence. So I wasn't allowed to watch Tom and Jerry, Roadrunner, stuff like that. That stuff, if you really think about it, is incredibly violent. And those are cartoons. And anyway, so for this movie, it's rated PG. The majority of it is, fantasy. It's clear that stuff isn't real. You got aliens everywhere. There's not really a whole lot of, I was going to say there's no blood or gore, but technically a little bit. People getting their hands chopped off, Walrus Man in the cantina scene. There's a couple of places where there's a little bit of that kind of thing. But in general, they made toys out of it. And, Star Wars ruled the world. So at least in the late 70s, early 80s, it ruled the world as far as boys went. Not until when they had some actual competition, from G.I. Joe and stuff like that, where the figures had more articulation, which is going to be a huge thing that we talk about a lot on this show. Just like any podcast that reviews action figures articulation is going to be one of our biggest things. So basically, I'm an OT baby, I guess, or whatever they call it, original trilogy fan, so I'm pretty much original trilogy. I also was still within. I was still very young, still when I guess you could say, teenage years, late teens, early 20s, when the prequel trilogy was out as well. So I have basically the memory of the entire franchise, the entire Star Wars. I've been there since the very beginning. I even had the 1976 book, the novelization that came out before the movie, and I think December of 1976, or maybe it was October. I think it was December, but it depending what printing you had or where you saw it. I think it was even printed in a magazine, at least an excerpt or something like that, sci-fi magazines. But as far as the different variations of Star Wars, whether it's prequel trilogy, original trilogy, Clone Wars and Rebels, or the sequel trilogy, what's out now, The Force Awakens, or the one-offs, I'm a fan of all of them. It doesn't really matter. Anything Star Wars, anything out there that's on TV or in the movies, I've liked. Some more than others, but so we will be talking about all that stuff. So feel free. I'm going to give you an address that you can actually email us at, and if you want to send in questions or possible review requests or any kind of request or any kind of question, you can email me directly at admiralakbar1983@yahoo.com. That's my primary email address that I use for anything Star Wars fan related. And you can email me at that address, or when I get done with my introduction, my guest and co-host will maybe give you an email address where you can talk to him as well. I'll be recording that shortly after this, getting this put together. It's my first podcast, so I'm going to do everything I can to get my introduction out of the way so I can get his in, and then we can talk together and make it more of a two-way conversation, or make it an everybody conversation, because you all can join in anytime. Send us your requests, you can comment, emails, whatever. Okay, so we covered that. I basically had the entire collection as a kid. Now, it might sound like a lot of stuff, but actually, in actuality, there was only about 100 figures in the entire collection over, between 1978 and 1985. So if you think about it, it's really not that much, because nowadays they're putting out, like, say, 20 plus figures a year in the 6-inch Black Series, not including exclusives. And yeah, so if you add that up, let's see, about 7 years, that would be, I guess that would be pretty close. But a lot of people can really still, they could do that. I mean, if the Black Series figures, the primary difference was back then the figures cost $1.99 or $2.49, or depending on where you got it, no more than $3.50. And nowadays they cost, $20 a pop, unless they're on clearance, or you wait a while and you can get a deal. And personally, I would for the most part, I would tell people to buy by the case. If you can find a place that sells sealed cases like mine, which I will be doing that in the future for you guys, for the fans, most likely. And you'll be able to pre-order. I will be doing subscriptions as well, where the subscription service would probably be where you get each figure in number order, a certain amount, like say like a 10-figure subscription for whatever price, depending on what version it is, a 6-inch or 3 3/4, super articulated, whatever. So that is something that I've been talking with my co-host that I'll be bringing on here in a minute. I've been talking to him about that, and that is something I'll probably put up around late October to December, somewhere in that vicinity, because I'm avoiding this Last Jedi rush, because as a retailer I could technically do it, but Disney's got street dates, and I don't want to really get into a fight with the mouse. So I'm trying to avoid those street dates. The primary thing that I was actually going to do was the new upcoming vintage collection. That is the super articulated 3.75-inch figures. And for those of you who don't know what the vintage collection is, that do collect right now, it's basically the Walmart exclusive Black Series figures. In other words, the figures that are 3.75 inches tall on average, that scale, that have more than 5 points of articulation, more than just a swivel arms and legs and ball jointed head or whatever. So the vintage collection is a collection where they put everything on a vintage looking card. At least the front of it looks like a vintage card from like the 1970s and 80s, the original Kenner pictures, and it's the basic same kind of feel as the original Kenner, because not everybody was made back then, so some of them they'll have to create themselves. But the vintage collection, which I actually didn't collect when they were actually around, which they ended in 2013, they'll be coming back in February of 2018. And so for the hardcore collectors, it's a really exciting time for them, and they want to have every figure. They want everything out there, and they don't want to have to pay like $100 for a Darth Revan figure or whatever. So like I said, order by the case or order by subscription, and that's the kind of service that I'm going to provide for the fans, because it's just something I want to do to help out. And so not to get off topic again, so the 1980s, I collected up until I was about 12 years old. Around 12 years old, I kind of, it wasn't cool to have toys anymore. It was, especially to girls. And so I basically packed up all my stuff, put it up in the attic. When I was around 13, I brought it down into the garage and thought I would have a garage sale. And even back then, they were worth more than what you paid for them back then. So I was actually, I was in love with this girl down the street, and I really wanted to take her out and all this stuff. I was already thinking about a car and all that stuff. So I wanted to get a jump start on buying a car, because I knew I had to earn it myself with my own money. It wasn't going to be given to me. And so I opened up my garage and put all that stuff out there, even some other stuff, other toys and stuff like that. And I had people coming up to me like, I'll give you a nickel for Luke Skywalker, a dime for C-3PO, or stuff like that. And I'm just thinking, no, this is not going to work. And, if I couldn't get at least what I paid for them or what my parents paid for them, then I was definitely not going to do that. And I had all of them. So I had all the hard to find ones, the rare ones, and those were the ones that people were like, oh, I'll give you $1. I mean, just because I'd never seen it before. But yeah, so I knew that wasn't going to happen. That wasn't going to work. It wasn't a thing that I was going to do, sell them for pennies. And I decided that I'm just going to put them right back up in the attic. And I knew that they were something then, that basically the longer that I held on to them, the more they're going to be worth. And I never sold them. I still have them. And so going up until the 90s, where the rebirth, I guess, like you could say, of Star Wars happened, was like in 1991, the books came out. The books, the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. They were officially approved by Lucasfilm, and this was just the start, basically, of what was going to lead up to hundreds of books that were released in comics and stuff like that. All of them were approved by Lucasfilm, especially the novels, and to a lot of people, they were what you call canon, I guess. And to some other people, they were just fan fiction approved by Lucasfilm, that were legally allowed to be published and made money off of because Lucasfilm got a cut. Because when Disney bought out Lucasfilm in 2013, basically they said anything that was televised or in the movies is Star Wars. Everything else is Star Wars Legends. In other words, fan fiction. So it started off pretty good in the trilogy. The 1991 stuff is, I think, 91 to 93 is when that stuff came out. And the sales were so good that Lucas, I think he had gone through like a divorce or raising his kids or I don't know, something like that. And he was, considering possibly, doing some stuff. But he was going to basically go back to the original trilogy, clean it up a little bit, get it digitally remastered for optimal sound and picture quality. That's what they say on the videotapes. So that's what he had planned on doing with the original trilogy. And that's what he did. So in 1995, they re-released the original trilogy in its original form, basically, on VHS tape. And he'd already started talking to Kenner about products, and Kenner in 1994 re-released at the end of 94, I think, or summer of 94, as a Toys R Us exclusive. They had a 4-pack. It was like an early bird set, and they looked similar to they're supposed to be the exact same thing as the originals, but they were updated slightly. They were slightly smaller, made out of different kind of plastic. But it was the resurgence of Star Wars. And in 1994, they released those figures. And then the summer of 95, around the time that the movies were about to come out, they re-released the action figures, but they were a little bit bulkier. They looked more like superheroes, kind of. They were still in their same costumes, but they were just a little beefier and out of proportion to what you actually see in the movie, because at the time, the primary thing was like Marvel's X-Men, and superheroes were really popular. These were 5 points of articulation figures, so to capitalize on the nostalgia or whatever you call it. Actually, there were 6 points of articulation. They had swivel weights. So they were like the 5 POAs, but they were updated with a little bit of extra articulation. And 5 POA means 5 points of articulation. And so when they got re-released, it did well. And in 1996, the following year, the number one boys' toy in the world was Star Wars figures. So when the 90s wrapped up, or when the 96 stuff, 97 actually is when they did the special edition. They re-released the original trilogy, but with new added bonus footage and extra, CGI, and, cleaned up even more, and more digital sound, DTS, and all that kind of stuff, digital theater sound 5.1 and all that. And I actually saw that I've seen all the movies in the theater, so pretty much when they were first released, like on day one. So the original trilogy re-released in the theaters was a huge thing for a lot of people. It was the 20th anniversary of Star Wars, almost, not quite, but almost. They released them in January of 97. The original movies were released in the May of 77. So they released the special edition of the original Star Wars on January 31st, 1997, and then the following movie, Empire Strikes Back, on February 21st, 1997. And Return of the Jedi was supposed to hit on March 7th, and I was there. I got my theater edition Luke Skywalker figure, and because I was actually the first person in line. And but unfortunately, they didn't show the movie that day. They actually said it was going to be out the following week because Empire and the other movie, A New Hope, is what they retitled it later on after the original 77 release, episode 4. They were doing so well in the theaters that they pushed back Return of the Jedi a week to March 14th. And some people, believe it or not, don't know that. They think that it was released on March 7th, but it wasn't. So I was basically around for the entire Star Wars, everything. I've seen every movie in the theaters, and except for when I don't know 100% sure if I saw everything on the exact day of release, like the first movie. I was a baby, so I don't know if I saw that. My parents don't seem to remember. They remember seeing it around Christmas time, which would have been a few months after it came out. And they also said they saw it before that on their anniversary, which was in October. So my grandpa said he took it to, or something, that he might have taken me to see it in the summer because we were up there for summer vacation. So I've always been under the impression that I've seen every movie on release day, but not 100% sure. I'm just going to say that I have because, I think I have. So now we're moving up into 1999, where the new prequel trilogy comes out with Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. As far as episode 1 goes, I saw that the day it came out, like two times. Like they had a midnight release thing. I saw it twice in a row, and then I saw it again later on, like 4 o'clock the afternoon the next day, because my friend had to work and he couldn't go watch it in the middle of the night. So we saw it basically opening day 3 times. And yeah, but as I didn't really get the same kind of vibe off of that, but at the same time, the amounts of Jedi was increased, the amount of lightsabers were increased, and I've always been a huge fan of the lightsabers. The lightsabers are, the best part, kind of, especially when you're a kid and you swing them around, because you can't fly a Millennium Falcon by yourself, but you can hold a lightsaber. So lightsabers were very important. And so they, unfortunately though, I did also see the soundtrack. I was working in retail at the time, and I saw the thing at the end of the soundtrack that says Qui-Gon's funeral, which maybe that was part of the reason why I didn't really have as much attachment to it, is because a lot of people, the book also came out a few weeks before the movie, and yeah, so a lot of people already knew that Qui-Gon dies. I wasn't really surprised, I guess, too surprised, but I was extremely disappointed that I found that out before I saw the movie. And I might have went in there kind of bummed out about it a little bit, but at the same time, excited to see a new Star Wars movie. And I really don't think The Phantom Menace was all that bad compared to what a lot of people say. As a standalone movie, it was a good movie. It did well in the box office, made almost $500 million. $500 million in domestic alone. So it, the Jar Jar thing, yeah, I wasn't real happy about Jar Jar, but it wasn't just that. It was the movie in general just didn't have the same kind of lost the magic a little bit. But I thought episode 2, when I saw that in the theaters, the opening scene with all that action, they're flying around. The first time I saw that, seeing it on a big screen with the DTS, I was like in a trance. I really loved the whole opening segment. And yeah, so I thought episode 2 was a million times better. And I don't know, the Geonosis part wasn't really my favorite part, but all the bug creatures and stuff like that. But yeah, the beginning of it at first made a huge impact. And this one even had more Jedi. I mean, we're talking dozens, if not hundreds of Jedi swinging lightsabers around in the Geonosis battle arena. And so I was definitely more into episode 2 than I was into episode 1. And Padme was so much... she was a better character, I think. Well, I don't know. It was different, sort of, in a way, somehow. She was more action-oriented. She wasn't just a queen in a dress and stuff like that. So I liked episode 2 better and kind of fell in love with Natalie Portman a little. So, and then episode 3, Anakin, his look is different. He's got longer hair. He's a Jedi now. He's another character that I really liked and enjoyed, not just Yoda and Anakin, but was Mace Windu. Mace Windu was a really great character. The guy who plays the Emperor, Ian McDiarmid, I think did a wonderful job. He was great at becoming what he became and acting it out the way he did. It was actually directed by George Lucas in the beginning. So George was the director, producer all the way through. So it was done very well as his rise to power and how he becomes the Emperor. So it was cool to see. I just wish we could have seen a little bit more of Anakin as Vader. I don't know if that was intentionally left the way it was so they could have like maybe a future animated series or whatever. But we never really got to see Anakin. We saw Anakin get, beat up and chopped up a bit and put into a Vader costume, but that's where it ended. We didn't ever actually saw Vader as Vader, or Anakin as Vader at the beginning, his struggle, or whatever. And we never really got that. Maybe we will someday, but we never really got to see Anakin as Vader hunting people down. I know we see a little bit of that in Rebels, where he, goes up against Ahsoka, and that's about the closest we've got. And hopefully maybe in season 3 or 4, actually, season 4 of the Rebels this year, we'll get more into that, because this will be the final episode or final season of Star Wars Rebels, and they're going to move on to, I guess, a new series that is going to be, I guess, in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, hopefully, because we never got, that's 35 years of untouched territory there. I just hope they do it well and they don't just screw up the whole series. So, moving on into the current stuff. Okay, I guess we kind of already did, but moving on into the current stuff. Last Jedi, I'm very excited for it. Can't wait for it to come out. I gave you a little bit of background, and so we're 45 minutes into this, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to my guest and co-host. I've talked to him quite a lot in the last year. Basically more 2017, and he is the co-owner of Jedi Temple Archives, created by Chuck, and I don't know his last name actually, Chuck. But anyway, so I'm going to introduce you to Paul Harrison, and here we go. So this is Paul Harrison from Jedi Temple Archives. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the First Jedi podcast audience.